Okay, I think we're live, so welcome everybody who's joined us so far. And if you would, while we're waiting, just open that chat box and tell us what state you're in. Or if we have anybody from another country, please let us know that too. Texas, DC, New York, Florida, Maryland, Kentucky, all over. Pennsylvania, Tennessee. This is great. Did I say, I think I said Florida, but specifically Orlando. I have a friend down there right now having a good time at the Disney parks with her kids. Missouri, New York. Music City, USA. I love that. Michigan. Another DC. All right, I'll give it one more minute and we'll get going. Washington State. Oh my goodness, it's early for you, Trina. Florida. Aventura, Florida. Atlanta, Georgia. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get going. So I'm actually glad everybody has their chat open. Please keep it open because as we go through the morning, we're going to have random polling questions pop up. And in order to submit your vote in the polling questions, you'll need to have that chat box open. And as you know, the polling questions are necessary because this event is being offered for CPE, continuing professional education, in accordance with the NASBA criteria. And so in accordance with that, we've got to have at least 3 random polling questions that you'll submit an answer to. To get the CPE, those of you who need it, you'll need to stay on the call 50 minutes and answer all those 3 polling questions. You'll receive your certificate within a week after this webinar. So that said, let me introduce myself. My name is Jackie McLaughlin. I'm with Chazin, as my background indicates, and Chazin is an outsourced accounting firm. We can do everything from transactional work all the way up to CFO services. And I like to call us an a la carte. So we tailor our services to whatever your needs are. If you only need 5 hours a week, we can help you with 5 hours a week. If you have an accounting staff that maybe needs a little extra help, we can help with that. If you don't have an accounting staff and you need one, we can help with that as well. And as I said, we go all the way up to CFO services. And Chris Huntley today is on the call, and he is our CFO services manager. So he will be joining this conversation and leading a lot of it. And that said, I'm going to ask each of the panelists one by one to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll kick it off. So Chris, why don't you start?
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Christopher Huntley, and as Jackie mentioned, I lead our CFO and advisory solutions practice here at Chazin. We can provide everything from fractional or interim CFO services, special projects that you have. Really, we're there to meet your needs in and around the C-suite of your organization.
Thanks, Chris. David, I'll throw it over to you.
Good morning. I'm David Fisk. I'm the President and Chief Executive of the Charlotte Symphony in North Carolina. We've had the Scottish team training here and staying just outside my window. And I've been managing nonprofits in the UK, Ireland, and the United States for these last 35 years or so, mostly in the performing arts, but not entirely.
Thanks, David. Bianca.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the CEO of Aperio Philanthropy. We're a fundraising consulting firm that specializes in relationship-based fundraising. We've worked with about 225 organizations nationwide of all sizes. My background is with very large organizations, and I am based in a state no one mentioned, which is Maine.
You're right, Bianca. I didn't see that in the chat. So thank you very much. And last but never least, Robert.
Thank you, Jackie. Good morning, everyone. I am Robert Rigger. I'm with Pinnacle Financial Partners. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. We're throughout the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. I'm a commercial banker, but I've really spent my whole career being a commercial banker for the not-for-profit sector. And for us, that generally is educational institutions, religious organizations, social service, kind of think YMCAs, Goodwills, symphonies, things just like that.
Well, thank you so much, panelists, for introducing yourselves. Let's move on to the next slide, which again, consistent with NASPA requirements, we're going to talk about our learning objectives today. So number one is we're going to learn how to apply a CFO level strategic framework to position your organization for growth and sustainability, regardless of external conditions. We're going to build forward-looking financial models that integrate strategic opportunities with adaptive planning and move beyond traditional annual budgeting. Define and implement stress testing and scenario planning methodologies, and determine the key risk metrics that should provide the size of the reserve. So having said that, the reason we're doing this is because the landscape is shifting for nonprofits, and that creates both pressure and possibility. While uncertainty exists, the most successful nonprofits aren't just reacting. They're using this moment to build stronger financial foundations, explore new revenue models, and position themselves as organizations that funders want to support. Today's conversation is about strategic financial leadership, how to build resilience, create options, and emerge stronger. So Chris, I'm going to start with you. When you're advising nonprofit leaders on formal strategic planning, the costs in time and effort are clear. But what are the benefits?
Thanks, Jackie. So when I talk to nonprofit leaders, in a sentence, it's, what would your organization look like if you were thinking more than a year at a time, thinking formally more than a year at a time? For most of us, we're just conditioned to think year by year. It's the cadence of our audits and our 990s and oftentimes our programs. But the fact is strategic success doesn't happen a year at a time. First, formally thinking about strategic planning. An organized strategic plan allows you to look at a longer horizon. So first and foremost, it gets your board doing what you want your board to do. It's thinking about the organization that you want to be, 5 and 10 and 100 years from now, more than just what are we funding this year. And it gives management permission in a way to manage to that longer timeline. Another one that's really important is better capital allocation. When everybody's thinking year to year to year, every dollar tends to be program, driven, and that's not necessarily beneficial. You tend to ignore, sort of changes in technology or long-term hiring needs, or even just basic reserves. So, when you're looking more than a year at a time, you're really thinking about what are your capital needs beyond the program that you're working on now. And then sort of related to that is kind of revenue intentionality. And this has really become super important in the last couple of years for a lot of my clients, which is, diversification is one thing, but are you actually thinking about the revenue sourcing that you're going to need for the objective that you have, 3 to 5 years down the road? So that's sort of how I summarize it, the elevator pitch that I give to leaders when we're talking about undertaking a long-term strategic plan.
Thanks, Chris. And I love that you're talking about a long-term plan, because I'm going to kick it over to David right now, who just concluded a successful 5-year plan and launched another 5-year plan that runs through 2030. David, what changed at Charlotte Symphony Orchestra once you committed to multi-year planning?
Thanks for the question. It's a complex one to answer because there are many reasons for doing strategic planning, and Chris has named several of them. I'll add another, which is it's very important for complex organizations, in which I would include the Symphony, to be aligned among the constituencies. So for those who aren't familiar, organizations like the Charlotte Symphony, Professional Orchestra, has a union to deal with the American Federation of Musicians. And for us to be aligned, the orchestra and its unionized musicians, the professional staff, and the volunteer board or boards in our case, it's very important to have a strategic plan that everybody agrees is good for the organization. And you get to that point by a very thorough strategic planning process in which all voices are heard and represented. And the plan itself obviously is the incredibly important outcome of that process, but the process itself is very important to create alignment and to have a very clear sense of direction created collectively. So we've just finished a strategic planning process that began with some help from McKinsey & Company, and I can speak more about that if there are any particular questions about it as time permits. Included some facilitation of large group elements, but we've now just published it because for us, it's also a sales document. It helps us with our fundraising. And the strategic plan, which you can find on our website, has the mission, of course, out there, the aspirational goals, the strategies. And what we don't publish are the internal parts that we would rather to keep flexible and adjustable year by year, which are the annual objectives and the tactics and the measurements. So we don't publish those. We publish the goals and the strategies, which aren't going to change as we make our way from now to 2030. And for us, as a Symphony, as many nonprofits in this position find themselves, we know that our expenses are committed for various years ahead, and therefore we have to have a strategic plan to be able to make sure that the revenue planning matches the expense commitments.
David, one thing that you said that I want to dig into just briefly, you said that all voices are heard in the strategic planning process. And previous to that, you mentioned, you obviously have a lot of musicians. So when you say all voices, are you talking about leadership in the board, or is that inclusive of musicians and other department heads you might have within the Symphony?
So what we did at our annual meeting this time last year was propose a process to the board in which at their meetings every other month, we would check in with them, the overall board on the process. So at the first meeting, they approved the core values. We came back, they approved the mission and the vision. They then approved the areas of strategic focus. Then we brought them the strategies. And then finally, we brought them the final plan. So the board as a whole had that opportunity. Then we had a strategic planning committee of the board that oversaw the process. And once we had identified the 5 areas of strategic focus that we decided to include within our plan, board committees responsible for each of those 5 areas submitted their ideas and their proposals for strategy to the strategic planning committee. And we ended up with these 5 pillars that are all interlocked, all equally important in their own ways. And we have strategies to go with each of those 5 areas. On the board committees that devise these strategies were represented musicians, staff, and board members. But we also checked in with the entire orchestra and the entire staff a couple of times to make sure that we were picking up ideas that could become either goals or strategies or tactics, or simply important things for us to hear, whether they be concerns or suggestions.
And I think the other thing I loved what you talked about is you've got your 5-year strategic plan and you've published that, and you have your 5 core items that you're looking to implement at the end of 5 years or looking to achieve at the end of 5 years. But David, don't you think it's that 5-year strategic plan that helps you year by year by year plan what you're going to do every single year? So you're planning for the upcoming fiscal year, you would look at that strategic plan and say, which one of these goals do we want to tackle this year? Or do we want to tackle a piece of 1 and a piece of 2 this year? So would you say that drives your annual planning as well?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you'll find within our plan is like the milestones year by year from here to 2030. And those milestones take note of internal things that are happening, like, say, union negotiations happening in 2028, but they also create some kind of map that's driven in part by our analysis, our SWOT analysis that we did early on, but also the environmental scan that we did. Because it's important for us to think about what external factors, somewhat within our control to address, do we need to be thinking about between now and 2030. So I'll give one example, which is one of the venues that we use for our outdoor concerts is going to close. And so it's important that we've got a particular set of tactics around how we're going to deal with that impact, which will affect 4 weeks of our 39-week season. So things like that were picked up in the environmental scan. And we also took all of our work really and laid it sideways and mapped it out between now and 2030, which also gives you a sense of organization and calm around what would otherwise feel like very large goals and very ambitious ones that might be a bit daunting. But doing it year by year helps people pace themselves and feel more relaxed about what we're trying to accomplish.
I like to say it's eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Exactly.
Thanks so much, David. Bianca, I'm going to throw it over to you. What are you looking for in a client's strategic planning? What inspires funders' confidence and what just looks like a client's wish list?
Well, thanks, Jackie. So our clients are nonprofits that are trying to grow their revenue, to grow their impact. And so quite frankly, I would actually love to see more real wish lists. The number one challenge I face as a fundraising consultant, and that really extends to what funders are seeing, is that strategic plans are too small and too incremental and too internal. So what we see is that rather than working backwards, like David was describing, in terms of where do we want to be in a few years? How do we want to change the world? What impact do we want to make? Who do we want to be? And then working backwards from there on what that means for the plan. People will build a strategic plan starting from here and sort of what's the next baby step? What's the next baby step? And the challenge is that nonprofits are solving some of the most complex, intractable challenges in our world, or playing these really, really nuanced and critical roles in our community. And so that kind of work really calls for much bigger aspirations, much bigger visions, and transformational plans that absolutely you can break down into baby steps, even though I don't like eating elephants. But we at least need the elephant to start before we can figure out how to eat it if we're into that. So what I'm looking for in a plan is, number one, is it actually meaningful to the world? Like, does this actually locate in a cause? Has the organization done their homework on what the real problem is in the society, not in the organization? What's the ecosystem of players who are trying to work on whatever that is? What's the unique value out of the organization in that mix? And why does all of this matter to the community? And then what you heard from David there, right, is that it's rooted in a real theory of change, of what are the building blocks of our strategy? What are the levers we can pull? What are we not going to focus on? And really importantly, is it collaborative? Does it leverage all the available resources in a community, whether that's other nonprofits or funders or supporters, advocates, volunteers, civic leaders, those kinds of things? Only once I've verified that it's meaningful, that it's rooted in a theory of change, and that it has factored in collaboration and other resources, do I start to worry about the practical things. And then it is, of course, like David said, those annual milestones, not just in terms of outcomes and metrics, but also financial leading indicators on the revenue side. Are there robust enough investment plans to make this happen? We've been in scarcity mode for a long time in the nonprofit. What funders and what I want to see is we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and really build our own capacity to deliver on our visions. And then the other thing that I hear a lot from funders is there a sustainability plan on the back end? Do you know what the one-time expenses are versus the increase to your run rate on the back end? And what we're really kind of like the bottom line here is that we're hearing from funders a real desire to think much more aspirationally, much more holistically, much more systematically about how we create change. And they want nonprofits to be thinking bigger about the potential of their business and how they're willing to invest to meet the moment.
Bianca, I never ever would have guessed that they're not thinking, that the feedback you're getting is that they're not thinking big enough. Please think bigger. It's really interesting. All right, Robert, how does the presence of a long-term strategic plan inform your judgments on reserves, debt capacity, and portfolio construction?
Yeah, from the banking perspective, where I'm often a lender, it's a big deal to know that a client or organization has gone through that. It still stuns me. I've done this almost 30 years, and I've even recently just received a 1-paragraph letter from an organization. Dear Robert, we'd like to build this building. We need a loan of X, and we need to close next month. If you have any questions, we're happy to sit down and visit. Well, I have about 100 questions. You didn't tell me almost anything. And that meeting, honestly, it's really just going to be a Q&A kind of meeting. We're not really going to, I want to know more about who you are and kind of why you are. So that's something we see, unfortunately, pretty often. On the converse, when someone reaches out proactively and sends us in advance, like, here's a strategic plan we've just not implemented maybe, but just passed. Here's our last couple of years financials. Here's our projection of financials for the next 2 or 3 years, kind of based on the plan. That meeting naturally is going to go so much better because we're talking about the high level issues, instead of me just trying to find out what's the project amount, how much did you raise, how much do you plan to raise in the future. And I'd say and this is almost any kind of sales or marketing that you might do with a donor or a lender, preparation to me just leads to credibility. Like, you don't even worry about what's in the document for a moment. The fact that you've done the process, you kind of just got a big check mark on the credibility. Because as lenders, we're looking for what the risks are. And a lot of times the biggest mitigant to a risk is the management team is very credible. Like, yes, there's going to be some challenges. We all have challenges. But when we feel good about the management team, that overcomes quite a bit. So absolutely.
Well, thank you, Robert. And Maddie, do you want to put up the first poll, please? And again, if you don't have your chat box open, please open your chat box so that when the poll runs, you're able to vote in the poll. So the first poll, how would you describe your organization's approach to financial planning? You react as things come up. You have an annual budget, but limited for, and you have a multi-year plan, but it needs something. And we have a strong, active multi-year financial plan. 28. Okay, Matt, do you want to give it maybe 10 more seconds and go ahead and close it? And Maddie, are you able to put the poll results, share the poll results? Perfect. So it looks like 3/4 of you are saying you do have an annual budget, but limited planning. And 1/4 of you are saying you do have a multi-year plan. So that said, let's move on to the next topic, which is revenue diversification. So Bianca, I'm going to kick it off with you here. Your team at Aperio has supported over 220 nonprofits in generating more diversified, sustainable revenue for their missions. How do you help clients distinguish between healthy mission-centered diversification and simply chasing every available dollar?
This is the $1 million question right now in fundraising. I'm going to start with one aside based on the poll, and then I will answer your question. I just wanted to, while I have a captive audience of folks who work on the finance side, One of the other really big reasons that multi-year plans are so critical on the revenue side is that investing in your fundraising capacity, whether that's headcount or other investments, is amazing because there's an ROI on it. They pay for themselves. A big mistake that we see, though, is that organizations expect that ROI in the same fiscal year. So if you want to raise more money next year, the time to bring on that new staff is this year. And we find it's very hard for boards to be able to really improve investments in fundraising growth if they don't have line of sight into that multi-year ROI. So just wanted to make that little pitch as we transition to revenue diversification. So on the diversification side, there's a few ways you can diversify revenue. So one is by donor type, so corporate, foundation, individual, government. Don't focus on government right now. Two, by revenue channel or source. Is it mail? Is it digital, peer-to-peer, face-to-face events? Obviously, you can diversify by donor, how many donors are contributing to your revenue. And then because all of our CFOs are on the phone, by designation, is it unrestricted and restricted, or what's the mix of restrictions? For most organizations, it is not a healthy setup to have high diversification in all of those areas because it means you're just spreading yourself really thin. So even very large nonprofits, which certainly have diversity just because of their size in all those areas, pick some places to lean in and focus their investment, energy, and attention. What's that 20% that makes 80% of the difference towards your sustainability and growth? The highest risk areas that we see in terms of lack of diversification is not enough individual donors and over-reliance on a small handful of funders of any kind. So on individual giving, I'm not sure how many of you are tracking the Giving USA numbers. They just came out, $617 billion given to charity in 2025. It's really amazing. 3/4 of that comes from individuals. And so part of this is just fish where the fish are. But beyond that, the reason to ensure that you have individuals in your mix is that it's the most dynamic audience for fundraising. Foundations and companies, particularly in this environment, have kind of this fixed pie that they're just redividing among nonprofits. But individuals really have unlimited giving potential. We're not competing against other nonprofits. We're competing against discretionary spending. So every dynamic fundraising program we see is rooted in individuals. So that's one really key aspect of diversification. The other one is when nonprofits get founded, they very often rely on a small handful of funders or maybe a big government grant or whatever that is. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. It becomes a high risk if you're resting on your laurels and taking those for granted and not factoring in the time and energy and timeline that it takes to bring other funders into the mix. So when you get into trouble is when you stop building relationships, stop looking for new partners, stop making asks, stop growing engagement that will bring that next flow of partners. So you always need a pipeline, even if you feel like you've got enough money right now, even if you feel like you've got enough funding right now. So just to summarize what healthy diversification looks like, one, you know your donors, you know the big ones personally, you know the little ones through data, their motivations and patterns. Two, you're retaining the donors you attract, that you are staying above that industry average of 46% year-over-year donor retention. Three, you're always bringing new donors into the fold in a really proactive way. And lastly, and getting into the restrictions thing, that you're asking donors to fund what you already want to do in that strategic plan, and you are not ever inventing programs to meet funder criteria. Ever, please.
Bianca, one thing you touched on, you said the individual donors are really the place to focus. And we know from the One Big Beautiful Bill that it's encouraging the kind of normal $100, $500 donations here and there through tax incentives. And it's a little more discouraging what I would call the whales who donate, the large amounts of money. It's a little bit discouraging that and encouraging the smaller individual donations. Have you seen that impact yet? Do you anticipate it will? In other words, would organizations be really, really smart to start cultivating more smaller volume donations because of this? Or what are your thoughts?
Well, one is that before the bill, the big trend in the industry was dollars up, donors down, that we'd been seeing a shrinking in the number of donors, but an increase in the average gift size. So everyone has to be focusing on how do we engage and train small dollar donors, which is really the base of everybody's kind of annual operating support. So absolutely focus on that. At the higher end of the gift table, we're not anticipating a huge impact for two reasons. One is that while taxes and tax advantages do play a role in giving decisions, that isn't actually why people engage in philanthropy. It's a much more personal and much more profound kind of driver of why people give at large levels. The taxes are just sort of the added bonus and might define how much, but it almost never comes up in donor conversations, quite frankly. The second piece is that a lot of individual giving, the money has already been donated. It's been given to a donor advised fund. So the pain is over. They've already parted with that money. Just get to deploy it. And same with family foundations. So I think we're still in a place of just high abundance, and we tend to just really overestimate the impact of tax laws on giving patterns and really forget how ingrained it is in the DNA of the American people to give and to be part of community and to put their dollars to work for good.
I love to hear that. Although we tend to overestimate the tax impact. Of course I do. I'm an accountant. So it's my job.
A fundraiser on this webinar.
Yeah. All right, David, we'd all like to believe funding follows strategy, not the other way around. But in the nonprofit world, major funders can have a very loud voice. Yes, they can. Without getting into specific donors or gifts, how does an organization like the Symphony balance donor intent when those priorities may distract from the strategic plan?
Well, I'll start by appreciating what Bianca said. I'm going to enjoy remembering those words that you share with us there, because it's very encouraging to think about what is there. And so to answer the question, Jackie, I'm a firm believer that money follows vision, not the other way around. You have to start with a plan that you then try to persuade your donors to get behind. And the trick, of course, is to have a variety of reasons to be attractive for those donors to support you. What was very interesting to me coming out of our last campaign, in which we raised $50 million, was that about half that money came from folks who wanted to support us because they perceived us to have civic value. They do not come to our concerts. And it was very strange to me that so much money would come our way because they thought we were doing good work, even though they personally weren't that interested in the music that we were performing. So we have a variety of reasons for folks to give, and that variety is very important because that helps to prevent us from being tempted to do something which a donor would like to do. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. People come to us saying, we'd love you to do this project, here's the money for it. We have to have the discipline to say, no, I'm sorry, it's not part of the plan. We don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the capacity. And an example of what that could look like in our case might be, why don't you do a recording? Well, why? And so we would have to have a very gentle conversation, which we would try to see if we could divert money that wants to go for a certain thing that we don't want to do, to see if we can provide a different opportunity. And a campaign is a very easy way to come up with a long list of things you'd like to have funded, so that people can choose from that list rather than coming up with their own ideas.
Yeah, and let me punctuate the point both you and Bianca have made. And Bianca, this is going to make the hair on your head stand when I say this. I know of an organization, not going to say who, where they do things worldwide. So they had an organization come to them and say, we're going to give you $5 million to build a school in Colombia. Well, the school cost $7 million to build, but the organization saw $5 million coming their way and went, yeah, we'll take it. Well, they're $2 million short of what they really need. And when we talked about this, the answer was, with 2 months left in the fiscal year, Bianca, we'll get our fundraisers to make up the difference. So that is a very, very big ask anytime, let alone with 2 months left in the fiscal year, and something nobody enjoys. So in that example, it really would have been better off, David, to your point, Bianca, to your point, for them to say, thank you, but no thank you. We can't do that. Robert, sorry, I went off on a little tangent, but we're going to throw it to you from Banking Capital Management. Do you agree with all this? Can organizations, in fact, over-diversify their revenue base?
Well, Jackie, first I'll kind of pile on to your example that donor or that organization may not have even thought yet about the operating cost, the startup cost of a school in a foreign country. So I am wholeheartedly with you that maybe the donor needs to bring some friends along to make that 5 closer to 10. But when I think about revenue streams, I think a lot about having sort of courageous conversations to say, is this still the right revenue stream for us, or line of business, or if you have multiple, campuses or facilities or whatever it might be. And in fact, our organization had about one revenue stream. It was about $1 million net income annually. It just went away because the county they were serving said, you know what, we'll just take that in-house now. They just lost $1 million almost instantly. Turns out they had 5 other locations that were losing about $1 million annually, that for some reason they just kind of thought of, oh, that's maybe our charitable effort. Or we just want to be in those locations even though they're losing money. But when that $1 million walked out the door, it became sort of acute that literally we cannot operate these anymore. The good outcome, as hard as it is for them to close some of their facilities, they visited us, their bank, early to say, here's our enormous problem. You're about to see some really ugly financial statements, and here's what we're doing about it. Sometimes a client will show you terrible financial statements and ask us to just be okay with it or give them the idea, which isn't really the right order for that to happen. What is really great, though, for this organization is, again, it's no fun closing anything. They communicated so well publicly, and we're able to say, we're losing $500,000 per year on this. We have for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. We'll just give this facility to the local city or county, which they did. And even the local people said, well, you can't lose $500,000 a year on this. That just doesn't work. So even people who are literally impacted said, oh yeah, we get it. In fact, why did you even ever do this?
Yeah.
It kind of had a funny outcome, but ultimately positive.
Thank you, Robert. Maddie, you want to run the second poll, please? And again, if you don't see the poll or you're unable to vote, please open your chat box, and that should give you the functionality. So the second poll is, does your organization currently have a formal scenario planning process? No, we haven't done this yet. 2, we've done it informally, but nothing structured. 3, we have a process, but we don't use it consistently. And 4, yes, scenario planning is a regular part of our planning cycle. And so far, it looks like the answers are all over the board. And while the stragglers come in, it looks like the lead answer here is we've done it informally, but nothing structured, followed by no, we haven't done this yet. And 18% yes, scenario planning is a regular part of our planning process. So this is a perfect opportunity, and we're glad that you're here. If you haven't done it yet, or if you've done it informally, but nothing structured. So absolutely, everything these panelists have to say is in an effort to help you do this. So that said, let's move on to our third topic, which is scenario planning and contingency budgets. So Chris, I'm going to start with you on this one. And by the way, as somebody who's seen some of Chris's scenario planning, I can tell you that he's very, very good at this. Chris, how can scenario planning move beyond what if everything goes wrong to how do we create strategic options and agility?
All right. Well, first of all, Jackie, you're too generous. It should be pointed out that I had a really great boss for 3 or 4 years, so that's probably where I got it from. So first of all, with scenario, and a shout out to David. In one of his earlier comments, he used the phrase organizational calm. I've literally written it down, and I'm going to start using it with clients and prospects because it encapsulates so much. So first of all, it's working on defining what scenario planning is. A lot of clients that I have come into it something that is related but not quite the same thing. It's like more like stress testing. And again, that's great. If your organization is doing even stress testing, you're probably miles ahead of your cohort. But really more scenario planning is sort of kind of towards the end of perhaps your strategic planning, or maybe throughout your strategic planning. And you realize where you are now, where you want to be, and you've created a roadmap on how to get there. And there are going to be certain through lines. They're going to be the ones who sort of most impact that path. And it's just, again, as part of that holistic thought process, saying, okay, so what exactly are we measuring about these sort of key drivers? What is, the guardrails? What's normal? What's okay? What happens when we step outside of those guardrails? And what is our path? Even if we can predict everything but the future, right? So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But when things start to go awry, or we think they're starting to go awry, then how are we going to react? Who are we going to call in? What advice are we going to look for? It's sort of planning things out without necessarily knowing all of the, exactly what all the details are going to be. So, the way I think of it, again, using that organizational calm, it's sort of pre-planning decisions before emotions get involved. And it's not always bad, right? We talk about scenario planning as just like, oh, what happens if there, is a disaster? And that certainly happened. I had several agency-funded clients in early 2025 who, their world was pretty heavily shaken. And, fortunately for most of those, or all of them really, in the preceding year, we had talked about political risk, which is suddenly now something that I have to talk about clients when we're doing this kind of planning. Things that, you wouldn't have thought of 2 or 3 years ago. We thought of agency funding. That was revenue diversification. That was solid. You were golden if you had a lot of agency funding, and suddenly it became a real threat. So there was certainly some planning in place. But yeah, so suddenly, people get concerned, but it could be the complete opposite. Sometimes you have a fantastic opportunity. You have, an overwhelming bit of good news, and how do you react to that within your strategic plan? So sort of thinking about, what are we focused most on as we keep coming to feedback onto the strategic plan, and how, what do we anticipate if things go wrong? Probably the simplistic example of this is cash reserves, right? So that's something that we'll talk about on this discussion, on this panel. Cash reserves. I have a ton of clients. I've had a ton of clients that have come in, and they're very proud of their cash reserve, and they absolutely should be, right? They've got, whatever months of cash set aside, and they've done a really great job putting that away. But then you ask the next question, okay, well, how do you know when you need it? How do you know when you access it? And then once you do, whom do you ask? Is this something, that it's, based on the amount that it can be managed with your executive director? Do you always have to bring in the board? And it's a good problem to have, but it's kind of ironic that you've done so much effort to build this reserve, and then you don't have any idea what's going to happen, like how you access that reserve. When do you use it? When is it okay to use it? So that's really what I'm talking about with clients with scenario planning. It's less about reaction and more about planning when you need to react.
So Chris, when you talked about that, the immediate thing in my head, because everybody, I hate to fly. I'm a very anxious flyer. It's analogous to me towards that flight attendant safety briefing in the beginning, right? You hope you never have to use anything they tell you, but if you do, you've got your scenario planning about the slide and the exits and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, exactly right. When the oxygen mask drops, it's going to happen, right? There will be an oxygen mask to drop, and you've already thought, okay, the first thing I need to do is put it on myself, and then I can help others. That's exactly right, Jackie. Excellent.
So, Bianca, from a fundraising perspective, how does scenario planning shape the revenue strategy conversations you have with clients?
Well, so I'll kind of speak on the reserve piece first. I mean, I think that the first thing is that our clients are scenario planning for what happens if their fundraising projections do or do not come through. And
Mhm.
so reserves have become a really interesting part of the conversation since the pandemic in particular. So our
Mhm.
industry has really been rooted in a scarcity mindset and scarcity business model for a long time. And what that has created is almost like moral discomfort with the idea of reserves. So food banks, for example, used to operate on a cash in, cash out, same year thing. And if you had a reserve as a food bank that was over X amount, it was like a bad thing. You know, cancer organizations I've worked for don't want to create endowments because they're like, it's immoral to not put the money to work for right now. So the kind of big thing that we are seeing is that there is a lot more concern about resiliency and backup, and absolutely, let's make those revenue plans, but let's have a plan if they don't come through. Where I think we're seeing this sort of like need for a little bit of a Goldilocks moment is like, what if it all goes right? And so Mackenzie Scott's giving has really disrupted this kind of field, because now all of a sudden there are a lot of organizations that had these big windfall gifts that's inspired other windfall gifts. And what boards have realized is, oh my God, our reserves are not only reserves, they make money. And it's nice to have money that makes money. And so,
Mhm.
your point about using the reserves, what's happening is both the original gift and the gains are getting lumped into this now sort of untouchable pot of gold. And I think that the scenario planning we are doing with clients is, well, what could happen if you started putting that to work? What would that look like? And what other philanthropic capital could that help you leverage? So that's a
Mhm.
lot of what we've been working on.
And investment income could be part of the revenue diversification strategy as well. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it risks becoming an end in of itself, though. And I think what
Mhm.
we're seeing is like the lack of pressure from boards to let's come up with a strategic vision for how we're going to deploy this capital to make change in the community, to a real distraction by how quickly can we grow the capital and then just sit on it.
Thank you, Bianca. We are starting to run out of time. So, Maddie, I'm going to ask you to put up the third poll, and then we'll move on to our next main point, because it's really a good topic, and I want to make sure we don't skim over that. So, what's the biggest financial planning challenge your organization is facing right now? And this is all over the board as well. So certainly diversifying the revenue stream seems to be the leader so far. Oh, followed. Oh no, somebody building or maintaining adequate reserves just pulled ahead. Along with managing uncertainty in the current funding environment, yes. And some of you moving from annual budget to multi-year planning. So we'll give that poll about 10 more seconds. It looks like diversifying our revenue stream is the clear challenge. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the operating reserves. Just in the interest of time, because this is an important conversation. And I will start with David on this one. So, David, reading your 2030 strategic plans, you have the makings of a model reserve policy. Please share.
Well, I appreciate the way you put that. I'd feel even better about us if we'd actually done it already. It's been something that has been necessary here for quite some time. And it's interesting to wonder why we couldn't do it sooner when it was so important to have good liquidity for obvious reasons. And this was a result of the leaders of our last campaign not feeling that we could include it in the case statement that we were making when we were going out there. And maybe it was just a quirk that these particular leaders didn't feel it was a sellable proposition. But what they did feel very strongly was that we could go out and raise pure endowment and expendable support. But the idea of going out to raise what would be a cash reserve, they just didn't feel they could do it. So now we have to do it ourselves. And I had done it in a previous organization, so I know it's possible. But I also know that our needs here are much greater. So coming to what was said earlier, I think it's very important to analyze what feels like an appropriate size of reserve for your needs. Be sure of that internally before you then go out and try to make the case externally. For us, with an annual budget of $15 million and revenue that does this all year long, we ought to have, in my opinion, a reserve somewhere between 2 and 5 million. I'd be happy with 1, but to be really secure, I'd feel better with 2 to 5. And invested, of course, whilst we don't need it. And depending upon who we're talking to, we describe it as a rainy day fund, or cash reserve, or an R&D fund, or the fund for the future. Whatever it is, it's important to have it so that we're not dependent upon lines of credit or borrowing against our endowment or running the risk of simply running out of money at any given moment. And so we're now embarking upon this as part of what we're calling our drive to 2030, as part of 3 elements of additional fundraising beyond our annual fund. We're expanding our planned giving society. We're looking for more endowment money. And then we're also fundraising for our cash reserve and obviously trying to post operating profits as part of that as well. So I think it is possible to make a case for building a cash reserve. But in my experience now, I have to say that it's harder to make the case for that than almost for anything else. Well, and part of it may be what I think it was Bianca said around the moral question about whether it's appropriate to be asking donors for money for that particular purpose.
I think what really took me aback in what you said is it sounds like there's an element of going out to donors and saying, please donate for our cash reserve.
Yes.
So, which is very different than, hey, please donate to help us, as I say, keep the lights on, or please donate to help us buy musical instruments. You were saying, please donate to help us build our temporary savings.
Yeah, it depends upon whom you're talking to as to how you phrase it, how you couch it.
Right.
But for those who give from the head, more than they give from the heart, they understand exactly why a nonprofit like ours should have a cash reserve. And they simply see it as good business management, coming back to Robert's point earlier. If I want our funders to have confidence in my management ability, I would expect them to expect me to be wanting to build a cash reserve as part of managing the organization well.
And you threw out a number, David, just then, the cash reserve that you want to build. But to get at that number, is that, X number of months of operating expenses? Is that how you came to that number, or another way?
Yeah, we would want to have X number of operating expenses covered by this reserve. We would also want to be able to take a hard look through our multi-year financial planning process to see, are there revenue streams that are our risk now, or that could be finite in some way, or appear to be trending one direction versus the one we'd like them to go in. And so all of those factors, added together, helps us come up with a number that we think is appropriate.
Thanks, David. Robert, I'm going to pull you in here. What do you wish more executive directors understood about their reserve strategy or lack thereof? And what does that look from the outside? What signals tell you an organization is or isn't financially well managed?
Yeah, Jackie, as a banker and a lender, I can't love reserves more. It's just not possible. Love them so much.
I love them too, Robert.
But I think a couple of things. One, I think if you can articulate why you need them or why you already have them, and for example, let's just say you have a large physical plant, like a Symphony would be probably a large building with all kinds of heating and air and roof. I mean, things that are absolutely going to come up as a large expense item in the future. Is it next year? Is it 10 years? You might not know that, but you always know that's coming. I mean, if you kind of do the math and articulate, here's why we need $5 million. That way we never have to dip into operations. I think a donor can appreciate that. Or maybe you don't own buildings, but maybe the 08-09 recession or the pandemic, at those moments you can say, here's how that impacted us. If we would have had reserves of this many months of whatever, we could have gotten through it a lot better. So just being able to kind of put either history or actual projections. So it's not just a big pot of money, because an unsophisticated donor might just see $5 million in cash and kind of think, well, that other nonprofit doesn't have any cash, I'm going to give it to them instead. And also think too, I remember one of the biggest churches in town had the heating and air problem. And they actually said, no, it wasn't a big deal, because we just went to our richest donor, and they wrote us a check for $10,000, and we were able to get through that. And they were sort of proud of that. And for me, I was sort of heartbroken, because I felt like you just told me you weren't prepared for HVAC problem, which is always coming. It's always going to happen on the worst day of the year. And you told your donor that indirectly, that you didn't prepare for something that was always going to happen. But then the biggest thing is, you kind of made that donor the hero for writing a $10,000 check. Like, what if that's $1 million plan giving kind of prospect, or a big capital campaign prospect? It's almost like you had the wrong conversation with them, and you kind of made them the hero, which they might feel like, okay, I did my duty here. Now I can give more to my school or the Symphony, because I took care of my church and they're big time in need. So to me, with proper reserves, that whole problem just never would have even come up.
That's a great point, Robert. Well, we are at 11:56 Eastern Time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat now. And I'll put on the screen ways to connect with us. And also, we do have, put that up too, looking for an accounting partner and finance partner. There's a free 1-hour consultation with Chris. So scan that one really quickly if you're interested in it. And I'm going to go back to the Connect with Us with Bianca and Robert and David's information as well. And of course, any questions can be put in the chat. And couple things come up. Maria says, can people share cash month on hand for operations and then for long term? She also says, and when you are referring to reserves, do you structure them short term for operating and long term for strategic investments? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Maddie. So Chris, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So typically when I think of cash reserves, it takes on some dimension of months on hand. This is sort of, you've got it invested in a very sort of low risk, investment vehicle, a CD or, money market account. So you're not getting much of a return on it, but you can access it immediately. And you've already sort of game planned this with your board so that you can access when you need it. And, that's a risk adjusted number. So if you're a membership organization with 1,000 members, then maybe the number of months cash on hand you have is different than if you have, sort of one big giant donor. That's just there's some math that's involved in there. And then at that point, that's because that's going to be dragging down your overall return on your total investable assets. Everything else that you've got needs to go into that long-term fund that you with your board has worked out on exactly what your long-term objectives are. And, somebody from Pinnacle can help find an investment return that an investment portfolio that the returns maximized for your risk. But yeah, when I'm talking with a client, that's the way we look at that. It's less about the balance sheet number, which is super important. It's a lot more about the policy number and the risk number.
Thanks, Chris. Here you go. How do you make the case for investing time and resources in financial planning when your leadership team is already stretched thin?
You call me. Sorry, shameless plug. Shameless plug. No, it's absolutely true. I say that glibly, and I'm sorry. I don't want to step in front of anybody, but it's. I promise. So I promise you, this is what not even like strategic planning, even budgeting, right? So I've never met a nonprofit organization where folks just had a ton of time on their hands. And so you're talking to your program managers, you're talking to your board members, you're talking to your C-suite who are already busy, and you're saying, okay, we're getting ready to do this, hundreds of hours of project. And it's the most important thing you'll do, but also you can't turn your back on any of all the other most important things you do. So yeah, that's exactly like, again, shameless plug, but that's exactly what we do. We come in, we bring that capacity, and then when you're done, we can go away, right? You're not buying talent permanently. And then of course we can, work with your team on finding that. But I've never met an organization who didn't want to do long-term strategic planning. It is always exactly what Haley said.
Thanks, Chris. Well, panelists, Robert, David, Bianca, Chris. She's putting up another. We are right at time, so I don't want to keep anybody here and go beyond. But panelists, thank you so very much for your time. And again, attendees, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your day. And you've got the contact information of all of our wonderful panelists on the screen. Again, we'll be going through the poll responses and the time on the call in accordance with NASBO requirements, and we'll be issuing certificates within the next week. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you all.